Hello everyone and welcome into another edition here of the GSMC the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for joining me on this Monday afternoon. We should have a great show ahead. Starting off by staying in the realm of Wildcard Weekend. Going to be recapping a couple of games throughout the week. Starting off with that Sunday night thriller between the Commanders and the Bucs. What a game it was. And then previewing our final remaining wildcard game over there in the NFC between the Vikings and the Rams, previewing another game taking place out west, Spurs, Lakers. We're going to be reacting kind of belatedly to this Antonio Pierce firing in Las Vegas. Very interesting situation there that has a lot of interesting storylines to follow. And last but not least, if you're a European football fan, stick around, especially if you're a Bayern Munich fan like myself, as I discuss their master plan to try and sign German wonder kid Florian Wirtz in the summer of 2026 after the events of the World Cup. Before we get into any of that good stuff, I do want to remind you, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the podcast and the network itself if you haven't done so already, to keep up to date with not just my show, but other great shows taking place around this time on the network as well. But if you want to contribute and interact with the shows a little bit more directly, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, or go to our website, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can do the same thing. Either leave any questions, comments, or concerns you might have about the show, any opinions you might have about the show on that website right there on my ticker below, or do it through YouTube itself while we are live streaming. It is just a great way to contribute and interact with the show. Like I said, it's genuinely appreciated by all concerned here at the network. It just makes our shows that much better. Without further ado, let's jump right into talking Wild Card Weekend, specifically recapping that crazy game that took place last night in Tampa between the Washington Commanders and the Buccaneers. And this was probably, in my opinion, the best game of Wildcard Weekend, not just on the field and how it transpired, but on paper as well. I truly believe that people were underestimating this matchup just because both of these teams feel like the most raw teams in the field. And in reality, not many people would have thought to be following them, considering the fact that had either of them advanced, they would have faced the two NFC favorites to win the Super Bowl in both the Lions and the Eagles. So ultimately, not a lot of people were watching this game to have any hope or optimism about the prospects of their team's Super Bowl chances. This game was mainly about the future of both of these teams. And both of these teams were so similar that it did take kind of pivotal moments throughout the game to really decide it, and ultimately the Commanders came out on top 23-20 on a last-second doinked field goal by Zane Gonzalez. And it just goes to show that sometimes having a rookie QB works. Jaden Daniels became one of 4 QBs to go on the road in their rookie season and win a playoff game, joining Joe Flacco, Mark Sanchez, and Russell Wilson, and he played brilliantly. They played spectacularly in that game. And what I loved about Jaden Daniels was not just his play, but the way that offensive staff and Cliff Kingsbury believed in him in certain situations. I think the big difference in this game between the Commanders and the Bucs, but the Commanders went for it on 4th down, and most importantly, won that matchup. They were 3 for 5 on 4th down, including that pivotal touchdown catch from Terry McLaurin that put them up 20-17, forced the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to drive on the field to either tie or take the lead. And then in that same situation that the Bucs had on the Washington 14-yard line, a 4th and 3, they didn't go for it and decided to kick the field goal, and ultimately look where that got them. But then again, there was one huge turnover that gave Washington a chance to go up by 3 points late in that game. That botched handoff or whatever it was between Baker Mayfield and Jalen McMillan that really cost the Bucs that game, in my opinion. But ultimately, there were very fine margins rather than throughout the rest of Wildcard Weekend, these big discrepancies between certain teams, say like the Broncos and Bills, or even the Ravens and Steelers. This was a closely contested match between two of the NFC's more intriguing teams, and I was really glad that we got at least one game from Wild Card Weekend that really topped them all. But then let's talk about these performances, because I feel as if we can't parse through many differences in either of these quarterbacks' performances because for the most part, both of them play spectacularly, especially Jayden Daniels in certain situations. And I think that's the only way you can truly separate these two, is that Jayden Daniels in critical moments, whether it be on fourth down or late in drives, really made the big plays, and his staff really trusted him. And not to say that Baker Mayfield did not make big plays. There were some big plays like that 3rd and 9 run he had to sustain that drive. And then ultimately, it came down to the play he didn't make in terms of that botched handoff. But both of them in terms of stats, let's talk about them. Jayden Daniels, 24 for 35, 268 yards, 2 touchdowns. Baker Mayfield, 15 for 18, 185 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I do think that ultimately it came down as well to supporting cast. Because in terms of supporting cast, Baker Mayfield's supporting cast didn't necessarily step up. Mike Evans certainly did in that situation against his longtime rival Marshawn Lattimore for the time when they were playing each other 2 times a year when Marshawn Lattimore was still in the Saints. Legendary match at this time. Mike Evans did get the better of him. I do believe, though, that Marshawn Lattimore wasn't at full health, but Mike Evans did have 7 receptions, 92 yards, 1 touchdown, making big plays in crucial moments. But it's the supporting cast of Washington that really stepped up. The unsung heroes like Olamide Zaccheaus, once an undrafted free agent, a 5'8 receiver that really was a cast-off in many situations. De'Ami Brown, the third-year guy out of North Carolina, proven to be a deep play threat, but also really impressed me in terms of his underneath route running and his ability to get open in critical situations. 5 receptions, 89 yards, 1 touchdown, was the leading receiver. And then, of course, Terry McLaurin working his magic in certain situations as well. Really coming up big time and time again with a lot of spectacular grabs in this one for Washington. Ultimately, like I said, in a game of this magnitude where both of these teams are so finely matched up, it's very hard to say, well, one team lost this game and one team won this game. But you have to look at the plays and the players who stepped up. That's what I think it really came down to, my opinion, because looking at time of possession, which is another huge indicator of how game flow really pans out, Commanders did have a shockingly commanding, for lack of a better term, line of possession with 35 minutes and 26 seconds, but it's not necessarily a huge discrepancy. I mean, it does show that they had a modicum of control over this game, but ultimately, when you're playing a team like the Bucs, can score at any moment, I really do think that doesn't matter as much as the players around Jayden Daniels and the staff really trusting him with such a heavy workload that depended on his brilliant play and his efficient play at that to carry them over the finish line on the road. So ultimately, I do think that when we look at Wildcard weekend games from this season, this one will stand the test of time. But let it stand the test of time because of the competition and the competitive nature of this game rather than the mistake. And it was only one mistake. Had it been a myriad number of mistakes for the Bucs, it would have been a little bit more glaring. It would have been a little bit more obvious. But ultimately, I do think that in terms of competitive spirit, passion, this game topped them all. And I hope that the next game we're going to be talking about in the next segment, the Vikings-Rams, can conclude Wildcard weekend with a bang as well. But ultimately, I just appreciate this game as a whole. But going forward for both teams, for the Bucs into the offseason, for the Commanders to take on the 1-seed Lions in Detroit, I feel like the Commanders, yes, are going to be massive underdogs, but another aspect of this game that I was really impressed by was their defense, especially their run defense as a whole. Guys like Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen stepping up in the crease, Bobby Wagner really reading this defense very well in terms of that linebacker tandem between him and Luvu. So ultimately, really impressed. Yes, the secondary has a lot of work still left to do. Ultimately, they might want Marshawn Lattimore to recuperate a little bit more. But I do believe that Commanders might shock people a little bit in this one. I do think that the Lions are a team that is depleted defensively, obviously, still can outscore anybody in this bracket. But I do think that what I really love about the Commanders headed into this game is that they're going in with no fear. They've seen what Jaden Daniels can do now in a playoff setting on the road, no less, and they're going to call this game like they would any other game for Jaden Daniels in terms of whether or not, he's a rookie or not. Because that seems to put everyone off a little bit, but Jaden Daniels has proven time in, time out that he can handle the pressure of the playoff environment. And so that's why going into this one, I'm still heavily favoring Detroit just because of their own potent offense. But don't think that Cliff Kingsbury, Dan Quinn, and co. are not going to call an aggressive game plan for Jaden Daniels. And then on the Bucs side of things, I actually think the Bucs have a very bright future. It's their second straight playoff appearance with Baker at the helm, and I do think, yes, they're going to have to start looking at options after both Godwin and Evans depart. They're getting up there. This was Mike Evans' 11th straight season, 1,000 yards, but how many more seasons are you going to get out of him and Godwin both? But I do like the pieces they have. Bucky Irving proved a spark plug in terms of the running game. I like what Kate Otten is doing there as well. Jalen McMillan really came on in Chris Godwin's absence, and I like how this offense is set up. Obviously, Liam Cohen's going to get a lot of calls for head coaching opportunities, so maybe retaining him will be the biggest thing I'm looking for. But ultimately, I'm excited about this Bucs team. But I have to say, the Ty Bowles also kind of let this team down because his clock management late in this one left a lot to be desired, and I do think that that was another big part of why the Bucs didn't win this game in the crucial moments. And so that has to be looked into a little bit, fixed and adjusted in the offseason. But ultimately, what a game. Glad that it wasn't a dud like the rest. And really hypes me up for this matchup between David and Goliath and the Commanders and the Lions. But coming next, we talk about the final game of Wildcard weekend, Vikings-Rams, and the ramifications, so to speak, of this matchup, and also what it means for the city of LA as well. But let's go into the break, and when we come back, we'll talk about it all on the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you haven't done so already, consider liking, following, and subscribing to the podcast or other shows on the network and the network itself to keep up to date with all our new and fresh content that we release each and every single day. But if you do want to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute and interact with the show, like I say. Just makes it that much better. You can do it through our website as well, gsmcpodcast.net, as it scrolls my ticker below. But other than that, just know that it's greatly appreciated, whatever manner you choose to contribute to the overall outlook of this show. I really do thank you all. But without further ado, let us get into our second segment, talking about our final wildcard matchup of the weekend, Vikings-Rams, and the interesting and somewhat devastating storylines around this game. Before we have to get into any football talk thus far, I do want to make this very clear. My thoughts and prayers with all those affected in the wildfires taking place in LA. The reason why ultimately this game did have to be moved to Arizona. But sometimes people's safety, people's livelihoods is bigger than sports. And I do want to acknowledge that wherever you are in the LA area, I am praying for you. We all are praying for you. And hopefully your safety isn't compromised by any sporting event, and just stay safe no matter what you do in terms of supporting your team. But ultimately, that is a bigger point that I had to make before we talk about the overall aspect of this game. But ultimately, it should still be an exciting game. Hopefully, will uplift the spirits of many in LA should the Rams come out on top. And even as someone who is a Seahawks fan, sees the LA Rams my rival, I'm still rooting for a fantastic game for the livelihoods of those affected by the LA wildfires. Without further ado, let's preview this game because it should be a good one. Rematch of a Vikings loss, only one of 3 losses the Vikings sustained this season after the bye. And so I do think that there's a modicum of revenge here. Obviously, the Vikings are seeing this as somewhat of an advantage, this game being moved to Arizona, but I don't think that the Rams are really going to be flustered at all. They're still going to play with their physical brand of play. They can't be underestimated at all. Really, ultimately, I had to tip my cap to them as a Seattle fan. Did deserve to win this division. Won the games they had to. And that is why they are what they are, no matter what's going on in their neighborhood. And so, in this game, I do feel like maybe psychological tolls will take place in some LA Rams players, but ultimately they're still going to play with passion for their city, passion in terms of wanting to make a statement here as well, say that they had to be looked out for as true Super Bowl contenders in the NFC. So I'm really looking for a good one. The Vikings, though, I do believe are still the favorites. I haven't necessarily checked the lines as much after transferring to this podcast, but I do think it will still be a good one. But ultimately, let's talk about some of the keys to victory here for both of these squads. And I think the main one for at least the Vikings here, keep Sam Darnold in rhythm. That's where Sam Darnold has looked his best for this team, when he stays on schedule. And Kevin O'Connell has done a really great job of mixing in play action to really show off his arm strength, really get him comfortable to the point where, he is operating at a high level. Most importantly, not necessarily putting the ball in harm's way as well. And he has a supporting cast to sustain him. I really think that a big difference in this game is that TJ Hawkinson, I believe this was his first game back after the ACL tear, if I'm not mistaken, in the regular season. And now he's at the point where he's become one of the biggest Vikings contributors in terms of the play action downfield passing game. So I think he's going to be an even huger factor in this one than he was in that regular season matchup, because I don't necessarily think he was 100% in that game. But now he should be ready to roll and ready to be a vital piece of this Vikings offense tonight. Then the rest of the Vikings offense as well offers so much versatility, because Justin Jefferson can help you in so many different ways if you're Minnesota tonight. You can open up space for a lot of these guys, exploit different coverages, really work man-to-man against this young Rams secondary, really challenge them a lot more than the last game, and then really also be the security blanket that Sam Darnold so vitally needs. Because remember, while Sam Darnold has played incredibly well, there are also still moments where he seems mortal. The same old Sam Darnold sometimes. That last regular season game against the Lions, when they could have won the NFC North and could potentially have not been in the situation, potentially be sitting at home waiting to find out who their matchup would be. And so that kind of sentiment can still sit in the back of people's minds when they talk about Sam Darnold, and a big reason as to why you might want to eschew that notion is because of Justin Jefferson, because of what he can open up, especially in the comfortable areas of the passing game for Sam Darnold. I do think that Sam Darnold can overcome the pressure the Rams will put on him. Because remember, Jared Verse and Braden Fisk really are performing admirably in the shoes of Aaron Donald that they're trying to fill. And even though, there still are some inconsistencies in this Rams defense, I still think that the secondary especially is still coming along. They have a lot of great young players in the secondary, Cameron Kinchens being one of them. And they really have done an outstanding job at all three levels to get everyone connected. But ultimately, there still are going to be many ways that Kevin Connell feels he can attack this Rams defense and really get Sam Darnold into the rhythm that he was comfortable with throughout the entirety of the season. And now they have everyone at full health. TJ Hawkinson, like I said, is going to matter a lot more. And the Rams might be on their heels a little bit more than they expect compared to last game. So that's why I think if this game plan works out for Minnesota and Sam Darnold remains the steady hand they need him to be, then this game's going to be a lot closer, and potentially a game where the Vikings can take some control after a couple of quarters. So that's the danger that this Vikings offense can pose if you're the Rams defense. But I do believe that the Rams defense will make a game out of this, really make this an interesting tactical matchup between their defense and this Vikings offense. And the Rams side of things, I feel like this game's going to be won and lost in terms of the time of possession battle. And I say this a lot in terms of how certain teams view the game plan both offensively and defensively. But especially for the Rams, I feel like their run game is going a little bit underestimated in this one in terms of how they can control the tempo of this one. Most importantly, keep this Vikings offense off the field and really help their defense win the field position battle. And so, while a lot of people might expect the Rams to come into this one with Matthew Stafford really looking to Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua to move the chains constantly and on a consistent basis, I feel like Sean McVay might just want to really take the pressure off these receivers and this very, very aggressive Vikings defense and try and pound the rock. Because remember, this Vikings defense still one of the best disguising coverages. And yes, Matthew Stafford in that last regular season game was perhaps the most efficient quarterback against this Vikings defense when they were putting pressure on him, when they were blitzing him. But ultimately, I do feel like the Rams are all about balance at their best. Yes, you have these chain-moving receivers. And yes, you have Matthew Stafford who's perfectly capable of winning a game through the air. But I love when the Rams are in rhythm with the balance and complementary football that running the football with Kyren Williams presents. And it also depends, right, on whether or not Kyren Williams is on, because when he's on, he's one of the better running backs in the NFL. But when he's off, he really hasn't necessarily been that big a factor in Rams games. And that kind of leads to people's worries, pundits' worries, especially about their inconsistency on offense. So I do feel like Sean McVay is going to want to target the first 15 especially to kind of feel out the Vikings defense. And hey, if the run game doesn't work out and you have to try and abandon it, then I feel confident that Matthew Stafford can, like last game, really be efficient enough against the blitz to keep the Rams in this game. But I do want to see this Rams offense be perfectly complementary to this defense is capable of doing. Because if not, that's what I start to fear for the defense. Because the Vikings are an offense that have had their troubles this season, have had certain pratfalls, this Rams game notwithstanding, in the regular season. But when they get in rhythm, that's where they're dangerous. And you don't want Sam Darnold at a point where he's really feeling himself in terms of the downfield game, especially in play action situations with this very hot receiving core and a tight end who's now fully healthy for this matchup. So that's why I feel like the Rams, in at least this game, have to buy into the mantra of ball control. Because chances are, if you win the time of possession battle, the Vikings offense can get in rhythm, the defense isn't backed up in certain situations, and ultimately you're staying on schedule offensively and trying to remain as consistent as scoring points as you can possibly be. So that's where I can see the Rams winning a hugely important matchup in this game. Because I also feel like the run game for Minnesota can go either way as well. I really love what Aaron Jones can do when he's on, and I really think it affects this Vikings offense when they're off. So that's why I feel like the run game can be absolutely integral to both of these teams' success in A, winning the time of possession battle, and B, ultimately winning this game. So it's an interesting debate here, but ultimately, when talking about this game, my thoughts and prayers go out to all the Rams fans and the people still in the LA area affected by the LA wildfires. Like I say, people's livelihoods, people's ultimate safety is bigger than sports sometimes, so I'm praying for you. Hopefully the Rams can make this a competitive game, even in a tough environment where they're outside their home stadium. But I do think ultimately, in terms of predictions, because I'm a Vikings fan, because my dad's a Vikings fan, I might have to pick the Vikings, and I do think that they might get a little bit more of the running game as well. But ultimately, I'm really looking for this Rams team to show a lot of passion in this one, despite what's going on in their hometowns. But let me know what you think about this game and how this might play out in the football field. And I'm coming next week previewing another game taking place out west with another LA team in terms of the NBA. Spurs-Lakers. First game for the Lakers after a lot of postponements, and Spurs team coming off a 3-game losing streak trying to get back into the play-in picture. Should be a good one tonight. We'll be right back to talk about it after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our third segment of today's show, we'll be previewing another game taking place out west between the Spurs and the Lakers. But bear in mind, I'm not the biggest follower of the NBA. I am kind of someone who likes to keep updated with things happening around the league, especially in terms of trade rumors as we approach the deadline. But I am still someone who is a little bit of a novice in terms of truly getting into the intricacies of the NBA. But when I saw this matchup, when I saw what was happening in the league, what with the Lakers and the Spurs coming into this one, I had to say, hey, I'm going to bite the bullet and preview this one, even though I might sound sometimes like I'm talking out of my ass here. But I still think that it's going to be an exciting segment, my first ever basketball preview segment here on the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it, rip off the Band-Aid. So obviously, we talked about the Rams and how their game has affected by the LA wildfires. The Los Angeles Lakers might have been impacted even more heavily. They've had postponements over these last couple of weeks, have not played since last Tuesday, I believe, a road loss to the Dallas Mavericks, and now ultimately, Crypto.com Arena should be full for tonight's game between them and the San Antonio Spurs. But the surprising Lakers really have had to lean on both LeBron James and Anthony Davis as their bell cows, really. And while Anthony Davis is proving that he is one of the league's best players, this is a 40-year-old LeBron James we're talking about, and while he still has glimpses of greatness within him, and I know he's still going to be one of the best players on a basketball court every night he steps out there, I do think that this game presents a unique challenge for both of them in terms of their front court action. On the Spurs side of things, this is a team that was hanging tough in the play-in picture over the first couple of months of the season, but are coming in off the 3-game losing streak, really got embarrassed by the Milwaukee Bucks. Victor Wembanyama, most of all, in terms of how he played against Giannis Antetokounmpo. But this presents another challenge in which I feel he might be able to win offensively against Anthony Davis going into this matchup. But most importantly, where they are in the standings, Lakers are 6th, so ultimately safe and secure for now. In the playoff picture, the Spurs have fallen out of the play-in picture due to their 3-game skid, but ultimately this one should be a good one, setting up ultimately to kind of take away the pressures of the LA Wildfire for a lot of LA Lakers fans getting into the rhythm of watching their prized team take the floor night in, night out. And my thoughts and prayers are also with a lot of these LA players. I've heard that around the league, a lot of these players' homes have been affected by the wildfire, so I'm praying for them as well. Hopefully they can put out a great effort on the court for their fans tonight. But let's talk about certain aspects of this game that really stand out to me. Ultimately talking about when we think about fascinating center matchups in today's NBA, Victor Wembanyama against Anthony Davis, especially on the offensive side of things, really is perhaps the most intriguing one that you might find on a given night. Wembanyama averaging just over 25 points, 48% shooting from the field, 10.8 rebounds, averaging a lot of blocks as well. Truly a spectacular player. Really high volume offensively as well. Still want to see him improve a little bit defensively perhaps, but because of his length and size, you can't necessarily complain if he has a down defensive night, because you know what he's capable of when he's on both sides of the floor. And I don't necessarily think that game against the Milwaukee Bucks was indicative of what he can be both offensively and defensively. It's just that he ran into a juggernaut in Giannis, who matched up with him pretty well. But ultimately, heading into this one against Anthony Davis, who's also having a career year as well, 28.8 points from the field, 51.9 shooting from the field as well, 11.9 rebounds, really goes to show that this is a big man's league right now. And your big man really is the focal point of your attack if you're an NBA team. And these two teams, yes, might not be playing the best collective basketball, but still are set foundationally in the most important position. And they could both be in the reckoning for playing tournament spots by season's end. So it really is important that in these specific matchups, your guy wants to win. And so that's why I'm really intrigued ultimately by the nature of these two big men in this one. And I feel like defensively, I feel Wemby might have the advantage in this one just because of the nature of this front court and how the Lakers might play. And it's really going to fall on the shoulders of the perimeter guys like Reeves, like Max Christie to really step up. But ultimately, I think it's going to come down to these two guys down low when they're both on offense, and how, if you know Wemby is winning the battle, Anthony Davis reacts on the offensive himself. But then let's talk about these role players as well. Let's talk about the struggles some of them have had, especially for the Spurs in these past couple of weeks. Let's talk about Devin Vassell, who can be an interesting piece here for this Spurs team, and someone who I really think they rely a lot upon for his perimeter prowess. He only has 14 points as an average in terms of his last 10 games, shooting 37% from the field and 22% from beyond the arc. So I do feel like if you're the Spurs, you might want to have some modicum of perimeter output as well. Victor Wembanyama can stretch the field himself, but you don't necessarily want to pressure him too much, have him creating too many shots, getting up there in terms of volume for him as well, because you do want him to affect the game down low as well, which you can do, but ultimately when your teammates are struggling to get high from the perimeter, this might be what he might want to do going forward. But you do need, if your team with such a unique big man as Victor Wembanyama, someone who can also exploit when he gets down low. Because I do think there needs to be that aspect of this offense where you can drive and kick. And yes, Chris Paul brings that as well. But I do feel like if you get stagnant from behind the perimeter, it can all fall on Wemby to go out there and stretch the field himself. So I do feel like some of these perimeter guys for San Antonio do need to step up in this one to have much success. Then for the Lakers, some guy who's getting hot in the perimeter for them has been Austin Reeves. And I really think the Lakers go how Austin Reeves goes, because he is someone who can distribute the basketball at a high level, understands that sometimes he's going to be the outlet for both LeBron and Anthony Davis when they want to drive and kick. And he's really assumed the role of point general very well, both in the Darvin Ham era and the J.J. Redick era, especially because of his swashbuckling style of play. He's not afraid to drive the ball himself. He's a solid, I shall say, three-point shooter. And ultimately, I feel like LeBron and Anthony Davis are starting to trust him a lot more as well offensively. And so, on any given night, I do feel like Austin Reeves can be the hot hand. 20 or more in 6 of his last 10 games, and ultimately he can be a security blanket if the matchup down low does not go well for either James or Davis in this one. And as you can see from LeBron's stats, he's more than willing to pass the basketball. 8.8 assists per game, but ultimately the question here is going to be, right, when LeBron is on the court, how do the Lakers get affected? Because early in the season, right, the debate was about how LeBron's presence on the court impacted the Lakers both positively and negatively, and how his impact when he wasn't on the court impacted the Lakers as well. And as we saw, when he was on the court, they really were not playing very well or very efficiently. And then when he was off it, they were playing much more efficiently. But then, when you look at his stats and the way he's buying into this team identity under J.J. Redick, I feel like he can still add value in certain moments, especially for someone like an Austin Reeves, who is perhaps your most reliable perimeter player. And yes, LeBron still got it in all 3 phases of this game. Offensively, he can still shoot the 3. He's still willing to drive the basketball, get to the rim, and ultimately, he's not necessarily a liability defensively. But there's something to be said about that stat that really could impact the Lakers going forward should LeBron see his usage rate steadily climb. And so that's what I want to see in a game against a team like San Antonio, where you match up pretty well, but down low you might struggle a little bit against the unique play of Victor. So that's where I want to see this Lakers team really figure it out. And that's what ultimately Greg Popovich and the San Antonio Spurs team might be willing to exploit a little bit more. But ultimately, when I think of this game, yes, it may not necessarily be the most important for these two teams down the stretch, but it is kind of a benchmark moment for how these two teams' seasons are going. When I think about the Spurs, I still think they need a couple pieces around Wemby to truly get to the point where they're consistently going to be either playing or Western Conference contenders. And then the Lakers kind of have been the pleasant surprise for me this season in the NBA, seeing as to how J.J. Redick coming out of the booth into this head coaching position really gave me pause for LA. But now, seeing what he's trying to build here, seeing how he's trying to get the best out of his perimeter players, a guy like Reeves, very similar to how potentially he played. So I'm really excited to see how this game transpires. And yes, maybe both of these teams make the postseason. Maybe one of these teams does. Maybe both of them don't make the postseason. But I'm really intrigued because this game is not just, a benchmark moment for these teams, but for the nature of the NBA. When you have two big men in Victor Wembanyama and Anthony Davis who can really impact how your team plays, you're a special team. And both of these guys are still young. Yes, Anthony Davis seemingly ages a lot faster than people think he does, perhaps. But Wemby is still young, and Anthony Davis still has a lot of good years ahead of them. Whether or not they're going to be with LeBron is a question that's going to have to be answered in the immediate future. But I do feel like this game is going to still be fascinating and thrilling from start to finish because of the nature of these big men, because of the similarities between these two teams. But ultimately, whenever we talk about LA, we have to talk about the Wildfires, and my thoughts and prayers are genuinely with the people of LA and the LA sports fans tonight, as both of their teams, football and basketball, play some high-stakes games. But Let me know what you think about these games in the comments below, because coming up next, we're going to be reacting a little bit belatedly to an NFL head coach firing that took place in Las Vegas, specifically that of Antonio Pierce. I'll be right back to break it down right after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows. Available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our fourth segment of the day, we'll be talking about a belated topic right now, but still a topic very relevant to the landscape of the NFL, especially for those teams eliminated and those teams really not looking to be contenders for the immediate future, specifically the firing of these said head coaches, and Antonio Pierce specifically from the Las Vegas Raiders. Perhaps one of the most unusual head coach firing situations, in my opinion, seeing as to how his tenure with the team was so short and thus so disjointed as a result of its time. And so I want to break it down from that aspect as well, whether or not he ultimately deserved, but also how the Raiders are going to view the head coaching position for years to come now that a guy like Tom Brady is owning a minority stake in this team. And I feel like this firing was highly indicative of the iron fist a lot of these players who turn owners feel that they have in terms of the structure of their organization. And so that's why most paramount when it comes to a firing like Pierce's is the fact that the front office probably wanted to give him the hook, but also how in the NFL you're given a very short time, really, if you're an NFL head coach in your first season trying to make noise, because fans and front office executives want immediate success. But then when you look at Las Vegas, it's also a situation where any head coach will be up against it if they're trying to rebuild this organization. So without further ado, let's talk about the bizarre nature of this firing with Antonio Pierce here. So ultimately, let's go over his career. Was the interim coach last year, led them to, I believe, just over a 500 record in his interim stages of his coaching career. This year, though, very rough year that saw Devontae Adams exit to New York, saw Max Crosby get a little frustrated, and ultimately saw a very inconsistent quarterback play. Perhaps the most inconsistent quarterback play in the entire NFL came in Las Vegas with some amalgamation of Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, and Desmond Ridder, which ultimately saw very little success for the franchise, leading to a 4-13 record, and ultimately his dismissal this offseason. But let's break down why in today's NFL a coach in that situation gets the hook this fast. Because Antonio Pierce is someone who I feel like was given very short shrift, was not necessarily prepared for this NFL season specifically, and really didn't understand the brevity and gravity of the situation that the Raiders were in. Because, let's face it, there were certain positives to this Raiders season. Brock Bowers' emergence, this defense having the capabilities to be one of the premier defenses in the NFL. But I do feel like the Raiders are in a precarious position year in, year out, where they're in a constant cycle of trying to figure out where to focus their resources. And I feel like with Antonio Pierce, if you're a new head coach, especially one coming off the interim tag, then you're given very little time to allocate your resources, what you want to allocate to. And I feel that while Antonio Pierce had more of a plan with the interim tag on him, he wasn't allowed to let that plan breathe into life this season. And that's why I think he got the hook this season. Another aspect of it is the NFL is a production business. And ultimately, the model that Antonio Pierce could put forth was not up to par. But my question is, will it ever be up to par if you still are looking for coaches 5 to 10 years down the road, which the Raiders are constantly in the debate to do? Because look at them in the draft. I believe they're the 4th overall pick in this year's draft, so you're not getting the top 2 quarterbacks. And you're really going to be stuck in this purgatory of being bad enough to get one of those high-end draft picks, but not bad enough to be able to rebuild and retool through it. So, again, it's going to be kind of a situation in the NFL draft where the new head coach is going to be faced with either picking the best player available or trying to fill a position of need, not necessarily knowing what the game plan is. Because I do feel like the new head coach is going to be a little bit more mouthpiece-like for this Las Vegas organization, because that's where I see it going. I feel like Tom Brady is going to rule with a little bit of iron fist, going to be given a lot of say. He already is in terms of this new head coach search. And then ultimately, as the years go on, he's going to amp up the pressure placed on these subsequent head coaches on the stretch to firmly cement the Raiders as a destination spot. Now, there are many ways that the Raiders can compensate for the loss of a guy like Pierce, and that is swinging for the fence and getting someone like Bill Belichick. And I do feel like if Bill Belichick comes to Las Vegas, yes, it will be a landmark hiring. But it's also one of desperation, in my opinion, because Bill Belichick isn't necessarily your modern prototype for an NFL head coach. So let's say that's Brady's ultimate choice and it's the way the organization decides to go. While I do think that it would make the face of this organization a lot more appealing, I don't necessarily think it's the best in terms of building a solid culture and identity if you're Las Vegas for the future. Because Belichick right now seemingly is more appealing to a lot of these teams because he's Bill Belichick. But I would want, if I were Las Vegas, a more modern coach with a more modern game plan to take this team in the future. And I feel like the only caveat there is that it will be tougher because of the Raiders' draft positioning in subsequent years. But I do feel like you need to start having some sort of plan to rebuild this franchise, because right now it's very moribund and things are not looking up. You don't necessarily know who your quarterback of the future is. Your defense might be showing signs of cracking under pressure, frustration, tension, what have you. And you really had a really public fall of one of your best players in Davante Adams this past season. So you're going to have to start building a culture that buys into whatever this new head coach is selling. And if it's Belichick, I don't really know what he can sell at this age in this juncture in time of the NFL. So if I were Las Vegas, I would be casting a very wide net here, because I feel like that was one part of their decision making with Antonio Pierce. They didn't do their due diligence and try and find someone. They just kind of rode the momentum of what Antonio Pierce brought to them during that interim span. So that might have led to potentially the fallout of this season. And so now they're a little behind the 8 ball in that regard, but they still have a lot of different ways to look at this, because they're going to be a team that are going to be bad for quite a bit of time, but eventually this head coach is going to have a lot of resources to be able to build something out of it. And so I feel like a lot of these young guys, especially at the offensive coordinator positions. Love hearing about a team as a project. And the Las Vegas Raiders are the biggest project out of any of these new openings in the NFL. I feel like this one will need the most investment, the most interest. I don't necessarily feel that an older coach like a Belichick, maybe even bringing back Gruden, would be appealing in that scenario. I'm looking at the guys of the future. I'm looking at guys like the Ben Johnsons, the Liam Cohens of the world. And I don't necessarily feel that that's the way Tom Brady might want to go with this search, but you have to, if you're Las Vegas, realize the nature of this project and realize the direction, most importantly, the NFL is going. You don't want to be left by the wayside with a coach in Bill Belichick who can't progress with the times. You want someone who's going to be there for the long run, realize the project, and rebuild it. And so, if I'm Las Vegas, I'm looking at all these young guys with a vision for the future. Because that's where Las Vegas can start to fully realize, hey, this is going to be a rebuilding process that's going to take us a long time. But if we choose to invest in it properly, then we can avoid the pratfalls of guys like Gruden and guys like Pierce. So that should be the mindset of the Las Vegas Raiders as they search for their new head coach. But hopefully this search can be one where they cast a wide net and really consider their options rather than try and speed it up as fast as possible to expedite the process, because that's what they need at this juncture in time. Let me know what you think about this firing, because I feel like it was a tenuous relationship at the end, but ultimately Antonio Pierce may have been fired a little too prematurely without a chance to rebuild this team, a chance to give them a vision. But let me know what you continue to think, because coming up next, if you're a footy fan, we're going across the pond to look at one of my favorite teams in the world, Bayern Munich, and their plans to sign the German wonder kid Florian Wirtz in the summer of 2026. We'll be right back and conclude the show with that information. Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, and for our final segment of the day, we're switching across the pond to talk some European football. Specifically, my favorite team's master plan to sign German wonderkid Florian Wirtz from our closest rivals, Bayer Leverkusen. It should be a saga that transcends German football, really a signing that could be a marquee one, not just for the Bundesliga, not just for Bayern Munich and Bayer Leverkusen, but for the future of German football and how it will look, specifically after 2026, because that is part of Bayern's plan. Without further ado, let's jump right into the logistics of this entire situation and the special player that is Florian Wirtz. So let's talk about Florian Wirtz as a player and how he could fit in terms of this lineup for Bayern in the future. Plays for Bayer Leverkusen, no doubt about it, one of the most important parts of their resurgence as a dominant team in the Bundesliga in Germany, winning the title last year under Xabi Alonso, and potentially that could also play a part into the future transfer saga that will befall Florian Wirtz. Ultimately a great player. 18 goals in 49 games last year in their Bundesliga winning season. 12 and 26 already this year. He's a dynamic attacking midfielder who can play as that inverted winger, can play as a striker or as a false nine, but ultimately gives you a lot of dynamism, and he's shown it not just on the domestic level, but the international level as well. Became the youngest ever German goal scorer at the Euros these past couple of summers, and has proven his ability to really foment the future, positively, of German football. But Bayern's master plans have already seemingly begun, because the Bayern board, the Bayern president, most importantly, the director of sporting affairs, has already met with Florian Wirtz's camp, and Florian Wirtz's camp, mind you, is also very firmly in the footballing business. Florian Wirtz's father, I believe, owns a small team and understands the nature of his son's future and how teams will start to view him in the coming years, especially after the 2026 World Cup, because that is when his contract will expire for Bayer Leverkusen, and that is when teams can buy him in terms of his release clause pricing, which is a little bit lower than what Bayer Leverkusen is valuing him at the current moment in time, which makes a 2026 signing a little bit more realistic for a team like Bayern Munich than signing either right now during the January transfer window or in the summer of this year. Because I feel like Bayern Munich want to sign him as soon as possible, invest in their future. But ultimately, I do think that this is going to take a long time, and this transfer saga will extend to that date after the 2026 World Cup. But in terms of this landmark signing, should it happen, I feel like people will not understand completely the ramifications and future impact this signing will make on the footballing world, not just domestically in the Bundesliga, but internationally as well. And so, in terms of if Bayern can be able to do it, which they look pretty intent on doing and pulling out and executing, I feel like the gravity of this signing will extend far beyond what people think. And it all depends on the triggering of his release clause after the 2026 World Cup. And looking at the 2026 World Cup, that is a World Cup that is integral to the success of German football for years to come, because they've already shown signs of resurgence under manager Julian Nagelsmann. In the Euros this past year, they have looked like a team ready to roll into 2026 as a true contender to win it. And so, should Florian Wirtz's contract situation after the 2026 World Cup become a little bit easier to navigate, that by all intents and purposes, if Germany has performed well, Bayern should be chomping at the bit for this deal to happen. And so, that's why I feel like a lot of people don't understand why this signing could have so much gravitas in terms of how it could play out for the future of this, not just Bayern football, but German football as a whole. Because Florian Wirtz really has been the leader of this resurgence for Germany. Really proven in every single game he has played for the German international team why his dynamism could be vital to the success of Germany over the next couple of years, over the next couple of World Cup cycles. Because a player of his magnitude doesn't come around for a German nation seemingly that wanted to play more possession-based football, never really had a dynamic playmaker that altered the perception of German prototypical midfielders, because German midfielders really were more box-to-box, possession-based midfielders until a guy like Florian Wirtz came along and ultimately changed the game for the way they were perceived. So that's why the significance of this signing also extends far beyond what people think. But another reason why this signing extends far beyond what people think, because Florian Wirtz is not the only one of his kind. Should he join Bayern Munich and sign for them for the next decade or so, he will be playing alongside another player with the same skill set, the same mindset, and also, most importantly, a German citizen, Jamal Musiala. And that is the ultimate danger for not just domestic football, not just for Bayern Munich's dominance over the next couple of years, but German football as well. If Jamal Musiala and Florian Wirtz play at the club level and the international level together, there's no stopping this duo. This duo could control world football for the next decade or so. And if Bayern Munich do sign him, it will solve a lot of their stagnancy issues in terms of how they view the transfer period, because this period is also a very critical time for a lot of Bayern Munich players, especially in these winger/midfield positions, because Joshua Kimmich is looking very likely to potentially leave Bayern over the next couple of years. Wingers such as Kingsley Coman, Leroy Sané, very likely to either see out their contract or leave either this transfer cycle or in the summer transfer window this year. So there's a lot of transfer rumors surrounding players exiting Bayern Munich, which could leave a gaping hole in terms of the big marquee signing Bayern Munich will want to make in the future to compensate for all of these player exits that could be happening in the very near future. And it will also help fill the hole in one of the biggest problem areas for this team, the winger position, because a lot of people think that Bayern Munich's team, in terms of the winger position, is either A, too similar, or B, too deep. And both problems exist right now. But if a player of Florian Wirtz's magnitude comes into that setting, he immediately offsets any doubts about what this Bayern Munich midfield and winger group is capable of. I feel like when we look at their current state, guys like Kingsley Coman and Leroy Sané are still elite footballers, but they're not necessarily footballers that can be seen as the future of what Bayern Munich wants to look like. They're not necessarily tied to the philosophies of this new look Bayern Munich that I'm thinking of. Because if Wirtz signs, you now have a midfield of Jamal Musiala, who, much like Wirtz, can also step out into the wing. Then you have Olise as well, who's going to stay there for the long run. And you now have at least an idea of what the future can look like for Bayern. Who knows if it will work out on the field. But Musiala, Wirtz, and Olise will be very elite for you. Maybe you're going to have to figure out some depth behind them, and I think they're already being a little bit proactive in that regard, kind of searching for more attacking prowess to help them in terms of the player exits they're expecting, but also to help kind of foment this Florian Wirtz push as well to make Bayern Munich a destination spot for him in the future. But Musiala, Wirtz, and Olise are all young players. Only Olise is 22 years of age, I believe. Maybe not even that. And I could be off here, but I do believe he's still in the young 20s. Ultimately, that future for Bayern Munich is too sweet to pass up. So, if you are Max Eberl, Christoph Freund, Jan Christian Jason, Uli Hoeneß, you should be continuously talking to the Florian Wirtz camp to get this over the line, because you would set yourselves up very well in the middle of the field with Musiala and Wirtz, who, might I add, Musiala's side of things, still himself trying to tie down a long-term contract with Bayern. But I do feel like it's going to be worth it to see this pay off. And then Olise as well on the wings, and maybe a young striker in the future, because I don't necessarily think Harry Kane will be the answer for much longer. Say a Jonathan David up top, or someone of that magnitude, someone who we might not even have heard of yet. Maybe Matisse Tell comes back into the mix as a youngster. You have a lot of young wingers as well. Ardian Ibrahimovic could potentially see himself in the squad. But ultimately, the success of Bayern Munich and German football would be secure if both Musiala and Wirtz play at both the domestic and international levels together. And in terms of German football, that should really be appealing, because Julian Nagelsmann will now have an even bigger blueprint to view both of these players in tandem through the eyes of Vincent Kompany, should he remain the Bayern Munich manager till that time, and how he plays both of these players. So it's going to be a very dynamic transfer saga between Bayern, Florian Wirtz, and any other suitors. And if Bayern wins, then Germany could win as well. So this saga is a little bit bigger than any other I could have think of in the past 5 years myself. So always stay tuned for potential marquee signing that could shift the perception of world football forever. But let me know what you think about this in the comments if you are a European football fan, if you are a Bayern Munich fan, because that will just about do it for today's show. This has been the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been your host, Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back here tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Like, follow, subscribe. You know the drill in terms of contributing, interacting to the Super Chat, Super Things, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. But other than that, I'm out until tomorrow. Thank you all for tuning in.